What's the scariest thing that science has proven real? Story 1. The size of our galaxy. How many other galaxies there are, and how far away they are, when you can actually see something that is incomprehensible. The nearest star to us would take the Voyager 70,000 years to reach. The nearest galaxy to ours would take the Voyager 749 million years. If we somehow managed to take on the monstrous task of speed of light travel, it would still take 25,000 years to reach the nearest galaxy, and it's even further apart after you read this. Wild stuff. And the fact, that's just what we can see. There's more out there. What's beyond the vast web of galaxy clusters? Is it just one small part of something even more massive? We have no idea. I have my bets on the multiverse theory being true eventually. Story 2. How the brain is literally rewired and chemically altered by childhood neglect and abuse. My sister faced horrible abuse at the hands of our father, and she has been working through it with multiple therapists over the last 10 years, and she is only now starting to get her life back. I feel like she was robbed of a fair chance at life because of our asshole father. My boys, 7 and 9, are adopted. They are biological brothers. They came to live with us as infants and 2-year-olds. 9 was physically abused extensively by the parent, and 7 was taken away at birth because social services had already begun the severance process. 7 is the most easygoing, laid-back kid ever. He's like a combination of Macklemore and Lebowski, just seamlessly rolls through life making everyone's day better. 9 has been in and out of inpatient psychiatric, rage, anxiety, aggression, violence, etc. When he's good, he's a great kid. When something sets him off, daily, he switches to this dead-eyed rage mode where all we can do is try to minimize the damage and injuries until he snaps out of it. My wife and I have sought out services, new meds, etc. in an effort to dial things back just a little so we can work with him, but we always seem to end up back at square one. I never believed it until I saw it firsthand. Can regrettably personally confirm our formative years shape our personalities, coping mechanisms, and worldview. On the flip side, this also applies to people who weren't neglected or abused. Our brains aren't done with the core hardwiring until we're grown, but the biggest chunk of it is done by around age 8 for most. I have children of my own now. Unfortunately, one of them is seriously messed up because he saw the abuse dished out by his dad to me on more than one occasion. I completely blame myself for not leaving his dad sooner. I swore never to become my mother, who just stood and watched/helped as I was being hurt. He wasn't abused, but seeing the things that happened to me has damaged him terribly. He's essentially his father's son. He's being transferred to a school for children with additional support needs in August. I've heard from others with troubled children who've gone there that it really helped turn things around for their kids, and I'm hoping the same thing happens here. Unfortunately, calls from myself and his educators as well as social workers to get him professional help have gone unheard by child and adolescent mental health services, the only people he can be sent to since he was 3. Fingers, toes, and everything else crossed. I help him in any way I can myself, meditation, mindfulness, etc., but I'm out of my depth. I see the potential he has to become his best self. I do nothing but encourage the sides of him that, if he learns his to tap into them, will turn him into an amazing man. I sincerely hope this school can help me help him. Got every faith in the world in him. We know very little about the brain as it is. It's probably even worse than we thought. Story 3. Some tumors have teeth, hair, and even eyes. My sister had one minus the eyes. It was cantaloupe-sized on one of her ovaries before it was found. She named it Terry the teratoma. Yes, they are called teratomas, and they happen because of issues during cell division in germ stem cells. Germ cells don't have general areas of function. They can be like other stem cells, think skin stem cells, that can turn into different types of skin cells. So because they don't have the specific functions, the germ stem cells can turn into literally any part of your body. These kinds of cells really only are found when fetuses are barely developing as a clump of cells. If something goes wrong, the cancerous cells don't know what to turn into, so they grow stuff like hair, teeth, and organs. It's truly terrifying, but they're trying to use it to grow new healthy tissue for people with cancer and other medical problems, which is kind of cool. I never want to see a teratoma. Story 4. Brain-eating amoebas. My best friend and bunkmate from summer camp died from one of those when I was in the 7th grade. Happened so quickly. We were a week into camp and he got really sick. They gave us all heavy meningitis shots because they didn't know what it was, and within a few days he was dead. Turned out to be a brain-eating amoeba. Edit. Strangely enough, on the same day he started getting sick, one of the lifeguards that was sitting out in a boat waiting for the next group of kids for what we called Trojans versus Spartans Day had a seizure, fell off the boat, and drowned. Only deaths they'd ever had in the 50-plus years the camp had been open. When I was in the 8th grade, I had a really bad headache because a kid the next town over from mine had recently had spinal meningitis. They gave me a spinal tap to see if it was meningitis. Nope, I didn't have meningitis, just a regular old ruptured aneurysm. That level of paranoia around spinal meningitis probably helped save my life. I once woke up from a nap with body aches and chills. I figured I just had the flu or something. It was Thanksgiving night and I work in retail, so I had to go to work tomorrow for Black Friday and the Saturday after. I struggled through work feeling completely terrible, and my neck is getting stiffer and stiffer, and my headache isn't going away. This whole time I also have a weird sore spot right below the base of my skull. I was lying in bed on Saturday night. A weird little alarm bell began going off in my head. My brain was telling me that there was probably something wrong with me. I have a friend drive me to the hospital, and every bump along the way is agony throughout my entire body, the worst I've ever felt in my entire life. I get to the front desk and tell them I have a headache, feel sick, and it's been hard to move my neck for the past couple of days. They tell me to sit down in the waiting room, but before I even have a chance to sit down, I'm immediately called back and taken into a room. The nurse comes in and tells me that they think I have meningitis. If I do, it's most likely viral, because if it's bacterial, you wouldn't be here. They tell me the only way to test for meningitis is to perform a spinal tap, but they must first perform an MRI to see if it's safe. MRI shows swelling of the brain, so can't do anything. I'm then sent for a CAT scan and see that my brain is swelling past the base of my skull. That's the weird part I was feeling on the back of my head, so they just treat me as if I have meningitis and see what happens in the morning. I remember laying there in the dark quarantine room at night. At some point, someone came into the room in a full-body PPE suit to change out some IVs. I began thinking to myself, I was going to die. What's funny is, at that point, I really wasn't that bad. I was okay with it. I wasn't afraid, more so intrigued and mentally relaxed. The morning comes and they check my brain waves. I don't remember why. The next day was just resting and blood samples. By day 2.5, I was suddenly feeling 80% better, unusual for meningitis patients. The heads of a bunch of departments of the hospital were coming to see me. The conclusion is that I have chronic hydrocephalus, and I probably had it all my life and never realized, and it's most likely what ruined my eyesight. They say it's sometimes common with people that have neurofibromatosis 1, like I do. They tell me that if it becomes a persistent issue, they will have to put a shunt in. I didn't realize how weak I was until I had to walk back down to the parking garage with my best friend. It felt like I had been asleep for a month and I wasn't quite sure where I was. It was winter, so I just rested my head on the cold glass of the car window. As the car pulled away, I remember seeing the Christmas tree out front of the hospital lit up in a warm gold glow, and it almost felt mockingly cheerful to place something like that outside of a building where people normally receive some of the worst news of their life. Ever since that day about 4 years ago, it's been back to normal where I rarely notice it. It just makes me chronically tired and awful at math. These things are becoming more and more common in swimming pools, especially home swimming pools that don't get chlorinated as often. Story 5. Aging. I'm content with death, but the idea of my body growing old, frail, and eventually falling apart before the end game gives me goosebumps. I've heard aging described as a series of losses. It seems pretty accurate. You gradually lose the ability to do the things you used to love, and sometimes you gradually lose your memories. Your body just stops functioning properly in general, and then you die from one of the side effects. Thought smoking or being obese was bad for your health. Being old is much worse. I saw a video of salmon who, at the end of their lives after swimming up the river and mating, lay in a puddle while their body just fell apart. Humans are like that in my opinion, only the process takes 50 years or something in our case. We have to raise the child first in order to fulfill our evolutionary role, so our process of deterioration happens slowly. Tortoises, the lucky SOBs, do not age like this. Their body just continues on like it was, without any deterioration due to aging. Apparently, breeding for a very long time was to its evolutionary benefit. They only die after they get hit by a car or something, or if they get ill. Their chance of dying from being ill does not increase with age. Daily reminder that your cells stop regenerating properly at age 28. Story 6. Prions. Horrific and totally unpredictable. Nurse here, I'm pretty much able to steel myself against most things. There's a lot of horrific messed up stuff in the world, but for the most part I can rationalize and neatly categorize things in my head. Horrific tumors, gangrene, massive tunnel wounds, eviscerations, I'm fine with almost all of it. Prions? Prions are one of the few things that genuinely terrify me to the core. Silent, non-living strands of malformed protein that cause other similar proteins to malform, in an unbreakable cycle that causes neurodegeneration and death, with zero cure, zero ability to mitigate, freaks me the heck out and kinda hits the fight or flight or freeze reflex when I think about them. They're just wrong, absolutely wrong on a fundamental level. Spongiform encephalopathy is terrifying to be sure, but prions are actually very predictable. I used to work with them and we could predict within a few days error when mice would become symptomatic. They also are pretty bad at transmission otherwise, so very difficult to weaponize. Wow, I did not even need to know about this. I already had a lot of things to worry about. Story 7. More like a theory, the orangutan paradox. When we film a documentary on orangutans, they can't realize that we are observing them, yet they are the most intelligent species of their category, so aliens could be watching us, but we are just as oblivious as an orangutan. Not only that, but aliens could be any shape. It could be the size of a grain of salt. Because we apply our earthly perspective to them, we picture them with brains and so on. Nothing says that they need what we call a brain, therefore even a head may not be needed. This is the one that truly messed with my head. Story 8. How little human scientists actually know relative to the number of things in the universe. You ever look at something and wonder, why does this happen? Or how does that work? Scientists do a lot. It's one of the main parts of their job. Here's the issue. A lot of the time, the answer is just, we don't know. Why does gravity exist? What actually causes it to happen? We don't know. Why do galaxies spin the way they do? We don't know. Why do humans laugh? On a neurological level, we don't know. Why do humans dream? We don't know. We have theories for some of these, and we can model some really well. We still don't have good answers to a lot of questions. It's easy to ask questions, really easy. It's hard to answer them. We don't know anything, and that's more than we've known for millions of years. Story 9. Giant squids. Suddenly, the old sailor stories of krakens wrapping tentacles around ships and pulling it into the ocean don't seem like fiction. There are a few sailor stories that turned out to be true. Rogue waves, for example. Scientists until the 90s predicted they couldn't happen until one was directly recorded by an oil rig. They're essentially enormous waves, at least twice the height of the average waves, that are very steep and can come out of nowhere, disappearing just as quickly. They can also come in odd directions, or be inverted, i.e. huge holes in the ocean rather than steep waves. Nobody's entirely sure why they form, but apparently quantum mechanics plays a role and lets waves absorb the energy of their neighbors under certain conditions. My dad used to tell me the story that he went out on a fishing trip in the Gulf of Mexico, and the boat slid into a hole in the ocean. Now Dad was not able to make up stories. He would go so mad when I told him that couldn't happen. Said the captain, this was 40-foot-ish boat, was scared lifeless until he managed to drive in circles around to get out of it. A few minutes. Told me that story the next day after it happened. Told me that story again, multiplied times over the next 45 years or so. I think there was something to it. Maybe the giant squids are the aliens observing us. Story 10. The scariest thing that science hasn't proven is whether or not the past actually exists, which branches from a greater issue that science can't prove whether or not the laws of nature will always remain constant, only that they have remained constant. It's an unsettling, albeit interesting rabbit hole to fall into. I mean, the only thing that really exists is now, and the relation of matter to each other in whatever pattern that is. The past is just a matter in another order of relation to each other, but it's still now. Time is just sequencing these relations and grouping them in contrast to other groupings. You can't just go to the past past without changing everything. We don't really have the capability to understand time as a fundamental dimension of the physical universe. Yet in physics and math, we understand almost everything else in relation to time. Time has always bugged me. Was there ever even a time before, well, time? Story 11. The infinite expansion of the universe. Everything in the universe is not only getting farther and farther apart, but accelerating in its expansion, such that one day in the distant future, whatever creatures are left to look up from their planets and wonder will see an empty sky devoid of stars and galaxies, as they've all expanded beyond the cosmic horizon. All worlds will be alone, drifting in the infinite dark, with no possible way of knowing the scale and beauty of what was. From my understanding, it's not a matter of the size, but of gravity. Milkdromata, like all galaxies, won't be pushed apart by dark energy, but eventually no light will be able to cross the galaxy's horizon. Then again, maybe someone who doesn't play Madden and do HVAC for a living has a more accurate answer. Story 12. Deep time. The Earth was alive 1,000,000 years ago, and 1,000,000 years before that, 1,000 million years before that. Even if our civilization is miraculously successful and we live for 20,000 more years and colonize thousands of planets like in Dune, it's still nothing. A blink of an eye. The Earth would barely notice. That's what gets me. When people say save the Earth, they mean save humanity. Because even if we cause a mass extinction event and wipe out all large life forms, the Earth will continue on going. Life will adapt. Give it a few tens of millions of years and our existence will just be a fossil record for the new life forms of a thriving Earth. On a geological timescale, we don't even appear. True, we should be saying save humanity instead. Story 13. The Carrington event. Specifically, what it would mean for humanity if it happened today. Pretty much the only people in America to come out unscathed or fare halfway decent are the Amish. It would spell the end of modern civilization. People would survive, and it would take us 40 to 50 years to even get close to where we are now, not including the fact every nation would have to go back to industrialization, which the planet absolutely cannot take any more of. Society as we know it would absolutely collapse. All satellites would get fried, meaning no GPS, no satellite communication, nothing. It would magnetize all magnetizable metals, so compasses would completely poop the bed. Destruction of the internet means an economic collapse. Supply lines would seize as radar systems wouldn't work, and container ships would get lost at sea. Airplanes and helicopters would suddenly stall and potentially crash. It'd be an absolute crap show. It would break literally all electronics in the world, essentially breaking society. Story 14. Black holes, especially the one at the center of our galaxy, an incomprehensibly massive object that sucks in everything that gets too close, and they're invisible. Actually, black holes are one of the brightest things in the universe. Because of their strong gravitation, it sucks in all matter. This matter gets compressed and ignites, creating a bright ring around the black hole. Due to its great gravitation, black holes bend light, causing the bright ring to, what it seems like, form a ring around the whole black hole. We still don't know what happens to things that go inside a black hole. What if it's another universe? Story 15. False vacuum decay. It's a quantum physics concept, but essentially it raises the question that there might be a lower energy state to matter as we know it. There's no way to be sure that it's not the case, and because of quantum fluctuations, there's a non-zero chance that somewhere someday a particle will decay into its true lowest energy state. Depending on how far that true vacuum is from the false one, the implications could range from small changes in cosmological constants to the cessation of all fundamental forces as we know it, i.e., full and immediate destruction of baryonic matter, or even immediate gravitational collapse of the universe. But to summarize it, if the universe quantum blips in a no-no way, we go bye-bye, Thanos snap style. It's quite possible that it has already happened somewhere, but if the difference is high enough that the released energy can trigger the universe around it too, there will be a sphere expanding at the speed of light. Therefore, we can't detect it before it hits us, and may cease to exist when it does. Thankfully, this hasn't been proven yet. Story 16. The Great Filter. Essentially, the theory goes that the reason we don't see a universe teeming with life is that life is extremely unlikely. So that must mean one step in the development of intelligent life is highly unlikely. The Great Filter is that unlikely step. The Great Filter could be in the past, meaning that there was some step in the evolution of life on Earth that was unlikely and we got past it. Or, and here's the scary part, what if the Great Filter is in the future and every intelligent civilization is doomed to bring about its own destruction? The problem is, it's an answer to a paradox that doesn't exist. It posits that there must be a barrier to development, rather than to detectability by humans. Chances are there are multiple Great Filters, and we've already passed a few of them. Story 17. Black holes. The idea of getting stretched and time around you slowing down tremendously, and it's not just all that. The scariest part is that they are invisible, because not even light can reach them. Even worse is the knowledge that even if you had an indestructible spaceship with infinitely powerful engines, once you cross the event horizon there's no way out. Due to the warping of space and time, any direction you go only leads further into the black hole. Fortunately, you'd already be dead by the time that happened, having been atomized by the accretion disk. Story 18. That one day the galaxies will be so far apart that civilizations living in the future will think that their galaxy and a few neighboring ones are all there is to the universe, as others will no longer be detectable. And saying that, has there been something in the past that we can no longer detect? Perhaps the answer to the existence of the universe was possible at one point. It just isn't anymore. I actually remember a short story about a planet where it was perfectly positioned with about like 8 stars, so that there was never a nighttime, and scientists figured out that they actually had a moon they didn't know about, and every couple thousand years the sun aligned perfectly behind it for a total solar eclipse, and that major collapses of civilization always seemed to coincide with these eclipses. When the time came, they locked away the important people just in case, and what ended up happening was that because they were always in daylight, they never saw the stars, and so they thought they were always alone in the universe. But then the eclipse came and they saw the stars, and basically everyone's minds just broke from the realization of a larger galaxy. Kinda terrifying. There are things out there right now that we can't detect because the light and other electromagnetic waves have not reached us yet, and will not reach us while humans exist. I wonder if there's been a certain stage in the life cycle of the universe that we simply are unable to detect. Story 19. The scariest thing for me is that we have scientifically mapped human psychology. We know social habits and evolutionary survival instincts that we've carried over from our ancient past. We have extensive knowledge of how to elicit the same exact response out of a human on command. And the scary thing is that corporations use this information to sell things to us. Everything about a product's design, from its shape to its color palette to its odor, is specifically and intricately designed to hack our brains and trigger the exact specific response that they want from us. Once you are aware of how much human psychology goes into advertising, you will never look at an ad the same way again. Fun fact to interject here, this is why children's television networks aren't allowed to have as much ad time as other channels anymore, as if that will somehow shelter them from the constant buy stuff narrative. LMAO, the child's brain is even more susceptible to the hacks and tricks they throw around. Also goes to show that advertising is just a bit of psychology. Story 20. Some forms of anesthesia don't numb you to pain. They make you forget that you felt it. That reminds me that early anesthetic for children didn't automatically stop the pain and just paralyze them. The doctors just didn't believe the kids describing the pain, and it wasn't until a child of a doctor was able to recount in detail the medical procedure and how he was cut up and what caused the pain that they stopped using it. This is all from memory from a college neuroscience class, so I don't recall the specifics. I'm scared of dentists. Dental work is a nightmare for me and has been so since I was a kid. So when I was youngish and needed certain dental work, my parents would take me to a sedation clinic and I was basically given Valium. I thought Valium was an anesthetic. It wasn't until much later that I found out it doesn't do anything for pain and was basically just making me forget the whole deal of dental surgery. You're not fooling me next time, scientists. Story 21. Scientific literature's conclusion on Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases in general is that the disease starts decades before the first obvious symptoms, and that we need to treat them at this stage. When you exhibit obvious symptoms, it's too late. Your brain is already mush. If you get diagnosed with Alzheimer's at 65, you've had the disease since your early 40s at least, and you experienced very mild symptoms but didn't notice it, and your brain fought like hell to compensate for the deficit. When you get diagnosed, your brain is already very severely damaged and will never recover from the deficit. This is a little bit difficult for me to hear. I have a really good friend who I love very much whose mom is in her late 30s and diagnosed with a hereditary early onset Alzheimer's. I know it doesn't really change anything, but with her mom hoping for a cure and her 3 siblings all hoping that they don't have it, and my own concern for my friend and her family, it's a little rough to think about. We're both 16. When my grandmother was in late-stage dementia and essentially an uncommunicative shell that couldn't move, talk, eat, or drink, I had the opportunity to speak to a neurologist. And as, at the time, I was completing my master's in biology, I asked a lot of questions, and we ended up going into some fairly theoretical material above and beyond my grandmother's specific case. He was of the opinion that there would never be a cure for dementia, as such, only, hopefully, a preventative because the damage done to the brain would be irreversible. A cure could stop further decline, but there'd be no way to restore the person back to their previous selves, to recover lost memories or lost skills, as the missing patterns in their neural pathways would just be gone forever. I'm still crossing my fingers for an Alzheimer's cure. That sucks more than anything. Story 22. Antibiotics have been abused and misused for so long that various bacteria strains have started to get resistant to them. What used to be a treatable infection might soon become deadly because we are unable to treat it with the antibiotics we have today. There is research to try and find other ways to treat antibiotic-resistant bacteria, but until then, please use prescribed antibiotics until they are finished, not until you feel better. If unused, do not flush them down the toilet or put them in the bin. Give it to a pharmacy so they can discard them correctly, and use antibiotics when necessary. Some countries give them willy-nilly, while others are more conservative. Also want to add that when people are planning on dropping their meds off to be disposed of, not all pharmacies will take old medication. I would recommend asking your pharmacy the next time you pick up your medication, and they will tell you if they do, or which locations locally do. The pharmacy I used to work at did not. However, 3 other locations in our town did, and we would send people to those spots. In my experience, Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, South Korea, from what I've heard from other countries as well, are wild about antibiotics. I had sinusitis the entire time I was there, probably from air pollution and germs that I wasn't used to. Basically, all the doctors would do was give me antibiotics. It was a joke there. No matter what you went to the doctor for, 3 days of antibiotics, which would then give me yeast infections. I eventually just stopped taking them. Asian countries really treat antibiotics like candy, it seems. Story 23. Everyone knows about scurvy, but the reason it's so terrifying is usually less known. You see, scar tissue is not permanent. The process to build and maintain scar tissue is constantly ongoing. When you become vitamin C deficient, your scar tissue starts being reabsorbed by your body, opening up any and all old wounds. If you have ever had surgery, those internal incisions will open back up. Fortunately, it doesn't take a lot of vitamin C, and it's abundant in our food sources, but it's still a little creepy that you could just start falling apart without it. A family friend ended up with scurvy due to a medication that prevented him from absorbing vitamin C. Stupid doctor doing stupid things. It nearly killed him from exactly this. Some surgery or injury opened and caused internal bleeding. Got airlifted from the local hospital to a real one, and they stopped the bleeding and discovered the cause. This theme of a disease like scurvy being not exactly what you think based on books and pop culture reminds me of leprosy, like leper islands where people live while their fingers and toes fall off. Everyone seems to think it's a disease that just makes your fingers and toes magically fall off, but this isn't exactly the case. Leprosy, the bacteria that causes it, releases a toxin that kills your peripheral nerve endings. This is peripheral neuropathy, and it translates to you feeling less and less in your appendages. When you can't feel things you touch or walk on, you inevitably can't feel if you've broken skin. and you can't feel the pain of being cut or punctured or the pain of infection. And sometimes the infection is bad enough to cause gangrene and tissue necrosis. This is when your infected fingers or toes fall off. Thankfully, leprosy is curable with a few heavy-duty antibiotics. But the same phenomenon occurs when people who have unregulated diabetes, those who don't regulate their insulin. It causes, amongst other things, peripheral neuropathy, again losing feeling in your appendages. People end up cutting their toes and left untreated develop gangrene, and when found have to be amputated. This is why it's common for diabetics to get amputations if they have deregulated insulin levels for a long time. So that's why diabetics lose limbs. Story 24. Helium. Fun for party balloons. Everybody likes a squeaky voice. Except, helium is a vital component of various high-tech devices such as MRIs. Helium is also light enough that the Earth's gravity cannot contain it. And we are running out. Not today, not tomorrow, but we are frivolously wasting it when we should be jealously hoarding it, and eventually we won't have any left, and a lot of our wonderful technology will suddenly stop working. This is something of a self-solving problem. As we start to run out of helium, it will become more expensive, and its use for things like party balloons will end pretty quickly. There's a decent amount of helium that's just difficult to get to, not worth mining for balloons, but definitely worth it for medical equipment. Obviously running out is bad, but this isn't an immediate nightmare scenario. It's a problem that will decelerate instead of accelerate, like climate change or antibiotic resistance. This is a widely spread myth. There's more than a century of helium left in the ground that's easily accessible, but present prices are distorted by the liquidation of strategic reserves by the government. It's artificially cheap. Once prices come up a bit, it'll be worth capturing, so the supply will increase as more gas well owners do. Right now, most wells just off-gas the stuff rather than save it. The net effect of all this over time is an adjustment to the price of helium. That's all. We're not running out. I don't know, a century's worth of supply doesn't seem like much to me. Story 25. There is a gravitational anomaly in space called the Great Attractor, which is pulling everything within the Virgo and Hydra Centaurus superclusters towards it. It lies 150 to 250 million light-years from the Milky Way, which itself is being pulled towards it too. The scary part is that relative to us, this anomaly lies within the same plane as our own galaxy, making it very difficult to observe. Essentially, we have almost no concrete idea of what it is. Story 26. It's fairly easy to clone humans. Just after Dolly the sheep was announced, the scientist behind it gave a speech at my university. It was going to be maybe a dozen from my department, then suddenly it was moved to a huge lecture theater and standing room only. He applied for a patent for the process to include the cloning of humans with the expressed wish of never allowing anyone to use the process for cloning people. The patent office excluded human cloning from the patent, which actually made it easier for human cloning to go ahead. Maybe some rogue scientist already created a human clone. We'll never know for sure. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.